everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always is my fabulous but rude co-host for interrupting the introduction. Who is that rude co-host?
It's me, Diana. What's it to ya?
Whoa, okay, Newsies. Pulitzer's over there. You go strike on him.
I never saw Newsies.
Never?
Because it's a musical. And
you do hate musicals.
I hate musicals so much. Them.
Who's that who hates musicals?
This is Jackie McDonald. It's hilarious because I always sing my name and I sing all the time, but for some reason when I have to watch it, I don't mind if there's like some talking in song. Mm-hmm. Like I liked Wicked. That's a musical.
Didn't see that one,
it's so good.
You'd watch like My Fair Lady where Rex Harrison like sings through the whole musical?
I just can't.
You just can't? I
know. I'm glad my friends haven't disowned me since I can't make it through Hamilton. But I'm working on it. It's amazingly done. Mm-hmm. Right? If I should love a musical, it should be this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The songs are great. I saw it on Disney Plus.
We listened to the soundtrack today.
Oh, yeah, I didn't. But I was in there watching it, and I was just like, oh, my God.
All my kids jump in. How does it pass?
We only got through one song, my husband and I was like, has this been 2 hours? And they were like, no, it's been 5 minutes. And I was like, what?
Aw. Man.
Okay. But anyway, this isn't a podcast about musicals.
No, nor is it a podcast about podcast etiquette. Neither of these things are true. This is a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we take a hot topic in the field and we discuss some relevant research articles related to said topic. And this week, this is actually an extra episode. We sort of had some time on our hands, and this is speaking of hot topics, we sort of thought this one was relevant.
You have to do that.
Yeah, I know. It's fine. Was relevant. And we said, let's throw out another episode with a little bit of recent research on this hot topic. And that hot topic is going back to school. And no, it is not about the Rodney Dangerfield 80s movie of the same name. It is actually the
Adam Sandler movie.
What Adam Sandler movie?
Madison.
That's Billy Madison. No, it's not about either of those movies.
Back to school.
Nope, it is about neither of those. It is actually about the process of returning to school, at least here in the United States, in the post-COVID, or actually currently ongoing COVID pandemic, at least in the U.S. Great job, America.
I wish it was post-COVID.
No, even in places where the issue is not quite as dire as it is in many parts of the United States, there are still a lot of concerns related to schools being open, if schools have been closed for a summer vacation, how to reopen them. So if you had listened to some of our earlier episodes earlier in the summer, we had done some episodes on providing home services during the pandemic. This episode is not going to be referring to the idea of providing home services as a behavior analyst. This is going to be very, very specific to how are we in America going to reopen our schools. And as a behavior analyst, how are we going to support the opening of schools, whether they are public schools, whether they are private schools, whether they're center-based schools, whatever the type of school. It's a building that is not someone's home, where children and young adults will be flooding or not flooding, depending on what state you're in, through the doors to receive an education of some kind. And well, this is definitely, I think, an issue that is on pretty much everyone's mind, whether you are a behavior analyst who provides services in a school setting, whether you are a parent of a child and you also happen to be a behavior analyst and your children are expected to return to school in some fashion or another, because summer vacation is pretty much, it's over in some parts of the country. It is almost over in other parts of the country. There's a lot of shifting priorities as to where school will be happening. And we thought, well, let's take a look at what research is out there. So we're going to be pulling some articles from the rapidly published Behavior Analysis in Practice journal.
Is that why you brought up Newsies? Because that printing press is hot.
Not exactly why, no. But that is what we're going to be talking about today. So if you are saying, you know what I'd love to hear? I'd like to hear more about how to provide home services. Well, we did a whole episode where we had a special guest, Dr. Francesca Delia Espinosa, talking all about her work with families in Italy. That article sort of summarizing the work she talked about on our episode has been published in Behavior Analysis in Practice. You can find that online. We are not going to be talking about that. We're not going to be talking about telehealth specifically in reference to how to provide direct services in a home setting, that we might talk about telehealth a little bit. There's also a nice article by Cox Plavnik and Broadhead in that same BAP. I don't even know if it's an issue yet, but you can find those articles all online talking about how to provide responses. There's, how to provide the service delivery models, what responses to that article, because there was some heated
Heated but
Yes.
appropriate discussions.
Well, heated in the sense of, good conversation about how do we have these conversations. That's why I like published.
Yeah.
I like published rebuttal articles because they're always very well thought out, and you read them and say, everyone's making such great points. What smart people, as opposed to when people just yell at other people, in which case it usually doesn't sound as intelligent as you'd like it to. Not that I've seen any of these authors
When it's
doing
like,
that.
You're dumb. No, you're dumb.
Who's the dumbest? You're playing stupid. Yeah, that's not helpful. So a lot of great articles on that topic. However, we are not going to be talking about that. We are going to be talking instead about two other articles, as well as some work, Jackie, that you have been doing in your own actual job. Not that this is not an actual job, but your day job role.
I have a day job. Just kidding.
Right?
I do.
Uh-oh. I haven't gone there.
So no. Has anyone gone to their jobs in so long? So we'll be talking about. Okay, good for you. I've Zoomed a lot. So we'll be talking mainly about two articles, as well as our own personal experiences working in our own either school systems or programs, and then sharing some other sort of citations, because I don't think you can go into Google and type school or COVID and not see a bunch of articles about how's it going returning to school? What's the return to school plan? How's it look around the world? A lot of stuff like that. So Diana, what two articles will we be discussing?
Sure. So we're going to talk about the article by Kornack, Williams, Johnson, and Mendes titled Reopening the Doors to Center-Based ABA Services, Clinical and Safety Protocols During COVID-19, and that is from Behavior Analysis and Practice 2020. And we will also be discussing the Peleas and Novak article Returning to School, Separation Problems and Anxiety in the Age of Pandemics, plural, in Behavior Analysis and Practice 2020. And as we get into these, everyone's at a different place, right? Everyone listening to this, some places are attempting to fully go in person to school. Some places are planning to do hybrid. Some places were planning to do hybrid and now have moved back to fully remote, at least for a period of time. And some are still undecided. So we're not trying to say like what people should be doing, right? Like, who knows? Everything is very up in the air. So don't get upset if it sounds as though we're saying like, oh, we're talking about returning to school. But if you find yourself in the situation where it is time to return to school, hopefully it can be done hopefully in a way that's relatively as safe as possible, right? So like that's the perspective that we're coming from here, not trying to figure out if and when people should go back to school.
So in America, Diana, there will be a return to school. The question, like you said, is what is that going to look like? And it is not going to look the same for everybody. It's not going to look the same from state to state, from district to district. There are big differences. Some of the bigger states have multiple districts that are actually doing hybrid. Some are doing online. Some are really thinking, let's try that in person, though not so many anymore. As of this recording, only one school is a school district in Indiana has been open after summer vacation. And within the first 5 hours of the day, a student tested positive for COVID, and they had to send the whole class home to quarantine for 2 weeks. So that was the first reported example of reopening school in person, and it did not go well.
Right. But to play devil's advocate, right, early child care centers have been open through the entire pandemic. Mm-hmm. And very few of them have closed altogether, right? There have been some isolated cases, but they have been going since the entire pandemic, essential daycare centers. And as they, as more start opening, and they haven't had to shut things down. So I think both sides, right?
The issue then comes into we're trying to solve a problem in which there are still question marks.
Right. Tons of question marks. Big ones.
I was under the impression that young children had a very low risk of transmission of COVID. But some of that has to do with, well, are they using masks, not using masks? Is there a community one in which the rate of transmission was already very high, in which case the overall chance and probability of the young children getting COVID just tends to increase? But then sometimes I'll even get an article saying, hey, this scientist says children have tons of virus that they're shedding all the time. So we can't even get 100%, yep, this is how the disease looks in this age group, that age group, that age group.
And by the time this episode is published in a week or 2 or 3, we may know different information than we have right now because things are really changing very rapidly with regard to what the scientific community knows.
Yeah.
Which would happen, right? Because new data.
Which is good.
Yeah, new data come out when
Yeah.
they figure it out.
Yeah.
We don't know things
But we just
yet.
don't know.
Right.
There's so much that we don't know.
Yeah.
That's why we wait for published research instead of living inside the research.
Yeah.
Well, ideally.
Yes.
Kind of a nice article. It wasn't a research article on the Science's
was really
website.
good, yeah.
That really did a nice summary of sort of what does this look like from a worldwide perspective, because I think certainly for our listeners here in the United States, it is very easy to hyper-focus on what's going on here because for many of us, that carries both personal and professional concerns. So kind of when we look at how things are going across the world, it does appear that many different countries have done many different things. And one of the things this article bemoans is how little consistent data were collected to answer the question, what's the best way to have children be in a group? It does appear that, again, wearing masks, staying in somewhat small groups tends to decrease the probability
Consistent small groups.
Consistent small groups,
Right.
yes, Jackie. Consistent small groups to transmit COVID. But again, other schools haven't done very much in terms of minimizing physical distancing and have still had some decent results. But again, a lot of that has to do with the community that individual is a part of.
Yes.
It does seem that with younger children, even with some of the fewer precautions, you still see less transmission even to adults. However, this stops being the case in, say, middle and high schools, where you start seeing pretty similar transmission rates as you would expect to see in adults populations during, businesses and, larger group gatherings.
Yep.
I think we've also all seen the horror stories of like the camp that opened and everybody got COVID, and
Georgia.
And
Thank you,
again,
Georgia.
a lot of what isn't always reported is what were the consistent precautions being taken? Were
Right.
there any? Were there some? And I don't think there's been a chance to collate, hey, no one's done the randomized control trial of this school open with these precautions. This school open with these. Our parametric analysis of which of these precautions
Right.
actually led to having more than a month of school before you had to shut down a bunch of the classrooms.
Right. We don't really have that option to be like, I'm going to put a bunch of these kids in this room, and this is going to be our COVID testing site where,
Right, no.
we're going to have large groups of kids, no masks, right?
Yeah, we're not doing that.
No social distancing. Let's see there. And then have another group where, you have all of the smaller types things.
Yeah. And at least here in Massachusetts, we've been fortunate in that while we were really struggling to minimize the transmission of COVID back when the pandemic first started in the country, we've done a pretty good job. So things are not necessarily on an upswing, but so much as they're at least relatively stable currently, as of right now. Who knows what it will be by the time this is published or even a week or two after that. And so in looking at the school reopening plan, we've still got 3-ish weeks or so. There's a lot of talk of, okay, are every district going to open at the same time? Are we going to add more time in for training, which is, again, where I think behavior analysis is going to be able to help out and come in to provide additional supports? What are the rules that are going to be in place? How are we going to be doing class sizes? I know personally all of our school district voted recently to do the hybrid style of opening. So they're going to have the kids come in for some of the week and then not for other parts of the week. So it's never going to be full class sizes. So they're going to be able to clean the areas and have like relatively small groups. But that even leaves a lot of questions. Someone like me, my day job is I provide consultation as a BCBA in classrooms. Is anyone going to want me to sort of jump between classroom based on where there's a need? Or am I just going to be sitting in my basement like I was all spring, zooming into classrooms and having teachers like hold me up so I can see what's going on? I become an X factor. So even some of those questions are not fully determined. I was fortunate to be able to be on one of our subgroups in the district, and there were so many great ideas. And it was really great to see so many professionals from various walks getting together. But there wasn't a single time where we didn't all have to sit back and say, okay, here's some good ideas. We don't know which of these is the best. We don't have any research to support any of these decisions, nor do we have all the answers, nor can we even predict that a month from now when this plan goes into place, we won't be back where we were in March, where everything needed to be closed to prevent just overflowing ICU care being needed to stem the tide of the virus. So a lot of questions. So we're going to try to answer what we can answer. I think looking around the country right now, and this again was current as of 7:23. This was on CNN, looking at the 15 biggest districts in the United States. It was updated 7:31. I checked it again.
Oh.
There's only one of the big 15 districts that will be open in person. 10 already said we're going online only. So that would include districts like Los Angeles, Miami-Dade, Houston, 3 have decided to go hybrid. That's New York, Chicago, Hawaii. New York and Hawaii, had sort of similar rates to, I think, where Massachusetts was. 1 was undecided. So again, you have a lot of districts that have already said, forget it, it's not happening, we're going online only, which on the one hand is probably easier to physically distance because you are physically not with anybody. However, that does lead to a whole bevy of problems. Certainly if you're a student who's receiving services from a behavior analyst, possibly you have either challenging behavior, you are diagnosed with autism and you need additional services. Those services weren't always able to be well run across Zoom, a Zoom call. That's what we talked about with Dr. Espinoza. There's no guarantee that just because you have an individual who works really well one-on-one with a person, that they'll work well one-on-one over a computer screen. I've heard lots of really, very sad stories about kids who were doing great and then they just check out. The second it's on a screen, they're not interested, or they're used to that screen being something fun. They're not coming to the classroom. They're really becoming disengaged from their education. Fortunately, many of them, at least in Massachusetts, were able to continue getting some in-person services, but that's not true everywhere. So we have a lot of problems just being online that might be good health-wise, but isn't necessarily good education-wise.
And let's not forget about the parents.
Yes.
Who are working.
They're probably working fine, right? They love it. Don't they love having their kids home all the time? Just
I have enjoyed spending more time with my children, but I'm also trying to work my full-time job at the same time. And many, many parents are in similar boats to me. And we are the ones who are privileged in that we can do our jobs from home. So many parents are essential workers. They cannot do their job from home. And having their kids be home, even the hybrid model, ours has our kids home 3 days a week. And only going to school 2 days a week. So even with that, there are many days in which childcare is a problem.
An obstacle, huge challenge, obstacle, right?
Yeah.
Although we might like to hang out with them, that might be a nice blessing in disguise. It's also an added stressor.
Well, I know what I'm always stressed about is the idea of if I'm providing services in a school setting and my children are home 3 days a week, we have 2 children who are of school age. Our district's been very good at trying to get more technology into the hands of all parents in the district. So really trying to make sure there's no equity barrier to education.
But that's not the case everywhere.
But that's not the case everywhere. No.
Yeah.
Even with that, our middle son has gotten very good at using technology and sort of becoming more independent because he's used to it. But we still have a young preschool age son who needs someone to give him something to do throughout the day. So do we send him into childcare? Do we keep him home and just take shifts? I know a lot of parents kind of got used to taking child shifts, at least, the parents that, that I've spoken to, that we've spoken to. And, again, we are fortunate in being in a community of, like professionals, where we sort of understand, some of the basics of, well, how do you make a schedule? And how do you, support, children? How do you, put in reinforcers in the right period of time? Like, we know how to do that. That's our job.
Yeah. We often have some level of experience with the education curriculum.
Mm-hmm. And I know specifically in our district, there is really an effort for our children who have the greatest number of services, who have struggled the most with online learning, to be in person as much as possible. That still doesn't guarantee they're going to be in person as much as they would need for their most effective education. And plus, all of this comes falling down. It's not a question of will schools that have in-person sessions, will there be any cases of COVID? It's a question of when it will happen and how often it happens to sort of shutter the whole thing.
Right.
So with all that doom and gloom out of the way, we don't have any other really positive statements to make other than, okay, well, let's plan for what we can do. So this is not going to be an episode where we end with, here are all the answers and everything's going to be great, because I don't think anyone is feeling particularly optimistic about everything. The best we can do, though, is take what we know and put it into place and say, well, here's where we are. Let's see if we can get a little bit farther along in this journey called life.
Yeah, I really don't envy the administrators who have to be trying to make these decisions.
I don't either.
There's no good answer, really, but I have many, many friends who are educators and teachers, and everyone just wants their students to be able to be back in the classroom and learning, but they want it to happen safely. Mm-hmm. So trying to figure out how that can happen is just no easy task, but we saw how quickly teachers turned on a dime to get things up and running remotely back in March, and I have no doubt that whatever format the education needs to take, that everyone's going to do their absolute best to deliver the best services that they can. So I do take comfort in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and kudos to the teachers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Kudos to the teachers and to anyone that's working in a school district, right? You have a lot
Or who has been providing essential ABA services throughout all of this.
All of this
Yes.
and
Yeah.
going to people's homes, like, way to go you,
Yeah.
right? Way to take one for the team in so many ways.
Yeah, this has definitely been a period I feel most professionals I've interacted with. It has never been an issue of we can't so much as how can we. I know I appreciate it because I think everyone has that moment where I just can't do anything but be doom and gloom. And to know that at any given time, somebody's ready to say, wait, let's think of a solution. Let's do the best we can. I know that has saved me. I think I've been that person a few times, but I know plenty of times I've been I don't know what we're going to do, everybody. It's hopeless. We're doomed. And it's been so great to have so many folks.
I hear him crying downstairs on Zoom.
Who are just ready to say, here's an idea. Here's an idea. Let's go from that. So the rest of the episode, we're going to be focusing on what can we do? What can you control in life? Not a lot, right? There are some things that we can do. So why don't we get started with sort of looking at some of the kind of the guidance that we have right now and then what that relates to. So if you are saying to yourself, man, there's so many recommendations. I don't have time to look at all of them. I wish someone had summarized them. Kornack, Williams, Johnson, and Mendes article pretty much reads like we kind of summarized the big points from a variety of state guidance on how are we going to respond to the pandemic going forward in our school systems. So kudos for them. So again, if you've been like, I've been scouring, I go to the Department of Education of my state's website every day to look for updates. Honestly, you don't need to read this article because you already know everything they're going to say. However, if you've been feeling like there's too much information, you just needed to check out for a week or two, and now you want to get back as fast as possible, hit the ground running, nice summary. This is a very nice summary of sort of what's going on. What do we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, and one thing I need to do a little side shout out is all of these authors are part of the Massachusetts Coalition for Practicing Behavior Analysts in the state of Massachusetts. Julie Kornack is on our advisory board. Ashley is the president, and Catherine and Eileen are really active board members. I'm the most inactive board member of the MassCap, is what they're called. But
are you bored of the board?
I'm the clerk. I sound like it's on Clue, right? The clerk in the library. But like, super shout out to them. They, MassCap, right? MassCap is staying really ahead of the game in all of this and really providing a lot of support to their members. So if you haven't checked out MassCap and you are in Massachusetts, I would really encourage you to do so because that's where actually I got all my information.
Yeah, they post updates.
And they post updates, and I mean, like, it made me feel more confident in the choices that I was making because someone actually was doing the work, right? So just shout out, way to go, you guys.
Yeah. And certainly if you want to, you should look at specifically what are the guidelines your state currently has in place, because I know for a lot of states, that's got to be changing on a weekly basis at this point. I think Massachusetts, we sort of had a bad start and then have done better because we sort of lived through, like, how can things go wrong? Whereas I think, unfortunately, a lot of states, it wasn't that bad at first. So when restrictions started opening up, you got the wave of infection a lot later. So is that better timing? Is that worse timing? There's no good timing about any of this. It's sort of just when are you and all of your colleagues sort of getting to directly experience what the pandemic is like, which is weird for Americans. Usually we just watch other places and say, that's another place problem. It's not an American problem. And that ain't true. That ain't true here. So let's look at some of the recommendations from this article, because again, none of them, when you hear them, none of them are going to be like, oh, what? Wash your hands? That's whoa. There's nothing in here that's going to be rocket science.
Right.
I think what is nice about this article is it really takes a very positive and proactive approach of, okay, what are the extra pieces of this you need to think about? So for example, when you're looking at opening your center, or I think it applies to your school, whether you're a private center or you're a public school, the rules are going to be almost exactly the same. You have lots of students who all have very different needs. There are going to be some commonalities no matter what school you're going to or what your disability is or what your learning style and any of that. It's all going to be the same. You are going to have some amount of health screening going on. Mm-hmm. You may have more temperature checks, though a lot of schools are not doing direct temperature checks, at least here in Massachusetts.
You have to do them. Well, they're not doing temperature checks at school because it's against HIPAA compliance is what I've read, but you are required to do a temperature check at home before you come to school and then report if you have a fever. So you're supposed to be doing daily temperature checks at home before you come to school and then reporting that, but you're not doing temperature checks at school. Mm-hmm.
Students need to be washing their hands more frequently throughout the day. I know a lot of schools are making it, sort of a mandatory part of the new routine of you come to school, Where do parents pick up or drop off? It's going to be in a different location potentially. Students are washing hands right when they get in. You have to wear a mask. At least in Massachusetts, you need to wear a mask if you are a second grader or above. And it's recommended that kindergartners and first graders wear their masks as much as possible.
Right.
This is very new.
Yeah, and in daycare centers, the drop-off and pickup has to be away from the building, so no parents are allowed to enter the building at any time to limit exposure. And they are staggered drop-off times, so each student gets a specific time in a specific location where they get dropped off, and their teacher or a designee for their classroom picks them up, and then they do the walk.
I rather like that.
It's actually really nice. And so what I've heard from parents too is it actually makes drop off easier for them because there's less like interaction in the classroom, right? So it's just like, okay, do you have a fever? Do you have any new symptoms? Have you been in contact with anyone? There's like a health screening checklist. Check. No. Okay, put on your mask. Even daycare centers are not required, but it's highly recommended that children over 2 wear masks when they're inside and they can't properly socially distance. And what we found is that it's actually not that big of a deal for the kids for the most part because you just treat it as if it's your shirt or your pants, right? So you make it a requirement, and then if they take it off, then they just have to move away from, the other, what they call them, like mask breaks or whatever they talk about those. But yeah, and then there's usually, when you come into the building, you're supposed to hand sanitize and then wash your hands in your small group because you can't go to a bathroom without your small cluster. Because even bathroom times now are timed, right? Because you can't have 2 classrooms in the bathroom at the same time because bathrooms have to be disinfected between each cluster of kids. Which, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, which is a little bit of a bummer when you're potty training because that's kind of out the window now. Right?
That's
So
hard, yeah.
Right? You can't really do that because kids just can't go whenever they want. They have to go within their
Jag, you were
structured times.
specifically speaking about your center.
I'm specifically speaking about early education and the requirements under early childhood education right now. Yep.
Because some of those things are not definitively decided upon per school district,
Sure.
at least in
That could
Massachusetts.
be possible,
So
yeah.
I just want,
Regulations.
yeah. I just want folks to understand that when you're speaking about you're speaking about early childhood
Yep.
requirements, which may or may not. I mean, I think a lot of those are probably going to be carried over and with older students. But
we don't know.
even things like in high schools, they're definitely going to be doing a lot more of those kind of one-way hallways because
Right.
you're dealing with such a huge influx of students at a high school
Right.
Or middle school level, whereas elementary school, you may be able to do the cohorts a little bit easier.
Right. That's true.
So again, a lot of these things sound pretty simple. Okay, wearing masks. I think, probably most kids have had some experience with wearing masks at this point. And, everyone's working on washing their hands, right? But again, when you're talking about the widest swath of your students, there are students who still have not mastered washing their hands. There are students who, because of their learning history, because of disability, are not going to easily switch into a brand new drop-off pickup routine or a bathrooming routine. When I say I want to go to the bathroom, I don't want to wait. You may be told you are not allowed to go to the bathroom until X, Y, or Z time. And if you do go to the bathroom, you got to go to the nurse's bathroom. If you go to the nurse's bathroom, that might mean you have to stay in the nurse's office and go home, because we're looking at various symptoms. Who knows some of these things? So there are a lot of variability pieces that are going to go into all of these areas. So in terms of what can behavior analysts do, well, it's the same as with any other skill. You need to be thinking about who are the clients I work with, who are the individuals I work with, what could go wrong, will go wrong, how am I going to plan for that? And again, it's not going to be rocket science in terms of it's going to be a lot more communication with families. It's going to be a lot more directed practice. It's going to be a lot more use of visuals. And it's going to be a lot more spending time on a few things until they're mastered rather than trying to get back to school as it was. And we're throwing in these other new things too.
Right.
And I think anyone who's like, we're just going to get back to school and start learning again, you are destined to have a problem at some point, probably within the first hour of the day. You really need to focus on what are the have-tos and how are we going to make it as easy as possible for the maximum number of students to learn these things quickly so that we can guarantee their safety as well as the safety of the staff and the teachers.
Right.
Yeah, I know, Rob, that you've been trying to stress that a lot, I think, in the meetings that you've had, right? Like, we cannot expect...
Those were confidential meetings. How did you know?
You're very loud. We cannot expect that students will be ready to return to school after 6 months of not being there and be ready to learn at the pace that they were learning previously, as well as adjust to all of these new regulations, which quite honestly limit many of the naturally occurring reinforcers that are usually accessed in the school setting. So to me, as much as you can stress, if you're in a position, listeners, to stress this to the administrators in whatever type of agency you work at, right? That of the utmost importance is just getting people into the new routine. And that doesn't mean you're not going to learn anything or not going to learn anything ever, right? But this is where we're at right now. And these are the life skills that we need to be focusing on.
Right. And if you also think that the students are going to come from various different places from the pandemic where nothing has changed, right? You're seeing everyone. It's like not a big deal. Or you've seen no one, right?
Yeah.
And your whole life has been uprooted and you've not seen other extended family, you've not seen your friends. And like you're going to have both ends of that continuum. And how do you come together and feel like comfortable as students, right? I think that's something we really got to think about too.
Yeah.
So when it comes to something as simple as wash hands, I hope many of you got a chance to listen to our bonus episode we did for TechSaba, where we talked specifically about hand washing. And if you did listen to that episode, what you may remember is that the idea of, everyone should wash their hands is not as simple a task as one would believe. And that's even before you get to the idea of some individuals requiring a lot more practice in washing hands to reach fluency. Not everyone wants to wash their hands. Not everyone thinks about how often they need to wash their hands. And while teaching the students is going to be a part of it, that also means as in your organization, making it clear to everyone how much you want them to help students wash hands, how seriously you take sneezing, wiping your nose, and then going to wash your hands. I know a lot of schools are trying to get spaces where they have sinks. Some classrooms are fortunate they have sinks in the classroom themselves, so they don't have to leave the classroom to provide opportunities to wash hands. I know a lot of schools are going to be increasing the amount of hand sanitizer stations that are available. But if we don't, as someone, behavior analysts or individuals who might be supporting classrooms or supporting administration, if we don't remind them of the importance of praising students for using the hand sanitizing stations without being reminded, washing their hands for the full 20 to 30 seconds that you're supposed to, it's going to fall by the wayside, even for our students who do know how to wash their hands. Because again, especially with younger children, they usually don't think about how important it is to wash their hands. They usually do it really quickly, and then they sort of run back to whatever they were doing. Maybe they don't dry their hands. Maybe they don't use soap. They get the quick, I rinse my hands real fast.
You don't need to do any of that, Rob. You get a little bit of soap on one or two fingers, and then you whisk both hands underneath the water, and you're done.
Wait, someone called it, oh my gosh, it made me the happiest thing in the world in a meeting one day. Like the priest's blessing when they were talking about hand washing, where you get just like 3 fingers wet, and when you put 3 fingers underneath and you're like, shake, 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 I'm done washing my hands. Someone said it in like a meeting that I was in, and I literally laughed out loud 35 minutes after, and I'm still chuckling about it because I'd never heard that before.
Oh boy.
Nice.
So don't do that.
No. So if you are working with young students or students who have not yet mastered hand washing, guess what? Your number one objective it's hand washing. Yay. Or one of the top 3 probably. If you are an organization that is looking to improve the consistency of hand washing, guess what? You probably need to start making sure that when you're checking around, you're spending as much time as possible pointing out the kids who are doing a great job. Make sure that teachers know this is something that's important, or staff know this is something that's important. Hey, maybe you want to set up your lottery system for like who's the best hand washing classroom in the building, or again, you can go back to that hand washing episode for a lot of ideas of how to make hand washing work. And these were hospitals where they couldn't get hand washing to consistently work. Yeah. So if you think that you get your school of young children to all be washing their hands perfectly just by sort of saying, hey, it's important, kids, think again. And, we have science that can help us with that. I think some other areas, the idea of communal materials. So we are going to have a number of students who are going to have to be told no a lot more than they used to be, or to have their own set of items that cannot be shared necessarily. So again, if you have students who are not used to the idea of saying no, they're very used to sharing with others. They've gotten very good. They work very hard on their manding skills. Unfortunately, that's going to go on extinction for a little bit of time because kids can't be sharing materials for safety reasons. So that means you might want to limit what materials are available. You might want to say, can we focus on denied access more? Or maybe it's a matter of let's keep these things away or set them up so they're only available at times when they can then be cleaned effectively so that the maximum number of students are able to access them throughout, say, a school day.
Right. Or maybe you can get multiple sets. Again, do you have the money to buy all those multiple sets? That's another question because maybe you can make 2 sets out of what you have.
Yeah. Let's make do with what you have.
2 smaller sets.
Yeah.
Certainly if it has to do with COVID treatment or getting your personal hygiene materials or environmental arrangements, there are a number of either grants or there is still state funding. However, most states and most school districts are really going to be feeling a pinch in terms of anything that goes outside of directly related to care of and sanitation of COVID-19. More materials is not going to cut it as like, that's the reason I need to spend this money. And you probably don't have the extra money right now.
Right, because all the money's going to masks, extra large gowns, right?
Yep.
All the additional materials that you need to make safe distancing possible in the classrooms, plexiglass,
Face
tape.
shields.
Oh, tape. Yep.
Face shields are actually very cheap comparatively. I got a set of 10 for only $9.99 on Amazon.
Hey, all right.
I know. And they had a cool thing that said face shield on the top of it. And I just loved that.
To help is a tact. It's your tacting your visual
Here it
your
is.
visual prompt.
Face shield.
We did need to take the kids to the dentist, and the dentist's office had face shields. They wore double masks and face shields, but they had animal prints around the edges, so they made the dentist look like a lion, and then another one had like an elephant one. They were cute.
Oh, potentially scary if your kid's scared of one of those.
Yes,
right?
but they were cute.
Cute.
It was
Okay,
not
good.
scary. And we should also talk about the face masks that have the clear
The
part
transparent
in the
Right.
middle.
face mask. Yep.
There we go.
So if
Thank
you're
you.
working with students who you need to, because of the proximity that you need to be to provide them additional support, either for safety or for prompting needs, is this a student who would benefit from being able to see your face, either to read facial cues or because they're going to have a challenge not seeing your mouth move because either they can't hear you very well or they're students who are deaf or hard of hearing that need to be able to see your lips to effectively communicate with a teacher. These are a lot of issues that, again, we're just saying masks. Everybody needs masks. Got to wear your masks. But okay, let's drill down a little more. Which of our learners are going to have a hard time either wearing their masks or communicating or working with people who are wearing their masks? Which are our students that are going to, just because of their needs during the day, are going to have staff who have additional training on how to use these additional, PPOE is the acronym? I said it right?
PPE.
What's the O?
PPE. I don't
There's
know.
no O.
There's no O. I just said it wrong. Sorry.
It's other. I'm just kidding. I'm just personal protective other.
Or
Yes.
equipment.
Or equipment.
Just kidding. It's PPE.
PPE. Thank you, Jackie. So which ones are going to need some amount of desensitization to seeing PPE? Which students are going to have it affect their schedule? When I hear the idea of cohorts, I think of, how many students have I worked with over the years that are they're in full inclusion or because of their age or because of their level of disability, get most of their instruction in a separate environment, but sometimes they join the group. Is it going to be possible over the next few months to have that ability to move back and forth? So can students go from one group to another group? Now, when we talk about equity, we talk about legality, we talk about best interest of our students. They should be able to move between environments based on their learning needs and based on where will they learn the best and where will they gain the most, which environment are they gain the most in. But now we're also talking about the barrier of health. So if you are a student who receives most of your instruction in another classroom, what will inclusion look like? Is there a way to provide it during outside times when you can have some amount of physical distance? Or are you going to have a really tough conversation with that student's family, the student's teacher, about what is in the student's best interest right now? Is it to be with other students and to not necessarily receive the same level of education or the same intensity of education they were receiving before? Is it they should receiving a high intensity education and they're just not going to get as much social opportunity? Is there something in between? Or is it a matter of, maybe we can move some of that level of intensity into a classroom in a way that we hadn't before? Can we take this opportunity to think about redoing what the education of this classroom is going to look like? Do we have a couple students who are in that same level of need and a few students who would benefit from getting more instruction? We can put them all together so they're not alone or they're not in a group of two students in their own cubbies. But these are conversations that aren't just going to get solved day one. They're going to have meaningful conversations with multiple stakeholders.
And one recommendation that I liked from this article is they said for those students that aren't wearing masks at school that are required to wear masks, work on it at home. Like maybe this is a really awesome time to use that telehealth option that in many states insurance has moved the time that it's still effective to later in the school year, right? It's going to be different based on different insurance, just little asterisk there,
Sure.
right? But use that time. That was one of the recommendations that I liked is maybe those kids don't run right into school, right? Maybe if the requirement is there, you work on those types of skills like getting their hand washing up to par, getting their face mask up to par, right? Via telehealth or at home, and then you acclimate them into school. Or they're in a separate part of school, right? That is for them so that they aren't in contact with all the other kids. But I really like those 2 recommendations on the things that you're talking about right now, is those pre-teaching skills that we may not have had to do post or pre this time, right? That might be more beneficial.
Before COVID.
Before COVID, right. Yeah, I like that recommendation.
Yeah.
That you're not just like, oh, sorry, can't come to school, but right, you direct your services to where it's going to be most appropriate and safe.
If you've listened to the show more than a few episodes, you know the answer is never no. The answer is, how can we make this work, for our client? What's the most we can do to help out? And I know a lot of school districts are really concerned about communicating with families. And I've seen a lot of good content about how much we should be reaching out to families, as opposed to, which I think, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I saw a lot more sort of like, well, they're not reaching out to us, we'll send them the newsletter, but they don't get back to us. I've definitely seen a lot more, real push from educators to be very proactive with families about, we got to have these conversations early and often. One other thing that I know this article made me think of was just how many more cleaning supplies will be readily available at any given moment, which on the one hand is somewhat helpful, not as helpful as you'd think in terms of increasing the amount of sanitation and hand washing that goes on. But how many of our learners are not supposed to be in close proximity to some of these supplies? Are we training our staff to know where to put the supplies, how to lock them up safely, how to put them in places where they're out of reach of our students? Because it's one thing to say, great, you got all this stuff now. You finally got a big tub of hand sanitizer. I don't know about you. I've been using the same hand sanitizer tub since February in my car, But, we've got all these extra supplies. That's what we've got money for. We got masks, we got gowns, we got face shields, we got hand sanitizer, we got this spray. And they're
right.
easy to access.
And not the spray we used to have, which was basically just like watered down toothpaste.
Right.
Right? Like now we got the real stuff.
Hydrogen peroxide.
Have we trained our staff where this goes, how to lock it up, how to make sure your environment is still safe without removing the proximity of many of these items that you will need all the time? Hey, this classroom went to the bathroom. I got to use the next 2 minutes to clean all my tables real fast.
Right.
So that's one skill that I don't believe it was mentioned a few times in the article, but the idea of, okay, are we preparing our students to stay away from those items? And are we teaching our staff how to safely store those items because they had not been necessarily asked to do so before?
And how to safely store and use them, right? Because there is, according to, EEC, which may be different from school, but you have to use them a lot more frequently. So it's not just cleaning at the end of the day, which was more common. It's cleaning between every potential contact that you could have, right? So before you have snack or lunch within your group, right? Because you can't go to the cafeteria, you can't go to that place anymore. You have these different sprays that you have to leave on a specific time, wipe one, put another one on, leave it for at least 30 seconds, right? And it matters.
Yeah.
Those
were in there before, but it is of utmost urgency now that it is
there's a different now. It's
different
more
spray.
Different spray.
Yeah.
I kind of smell a checklist coming in the future.
Oh yeah.
Well, and even beyond
There
just
is
the
one.
checklist. Not that behavior skills training is solely the domain of the behavior analyst, but if you're either a part of a private school or a public school, you're probably the person who thinks the most about training and how training works and how to do training correctly. And I don't think it always comes into play. It's one thing to say, we're going to do a big training. We're going to train everybody on these new skills. And I know for me, and everyone expected it from me because they've worked with me long enough in my current school district, I'm going to be the guy who says, it's not going to work if we just show everyone the video and we're like, we hope you can do this. If we're not constantly checking in with people and saying, here are the 3 or 4 things that we have to get our teachers doing regularly, the new routines, and we're not checking in with them, we're not providing corrective feedback, positive praise for when they're doing it correctly, no one is going to do it correctly. And it's not because they don't care about the kids. It's because it is very hard to expect someone to come in and do not only kind of their old job, but a brand new job of health inspector. And just like we know, anybody, anyone who's been teaching for a long period of time or anyone who's had a job for a period of time, what do you do when you can't remember the new routine? You go back to your old routine.
Yes.
And our old routine is not going to cut it in terms of minimizing the risks for students and other professionals. So,
and as scary as this is, you will still see drift.
Yes.
You'll still see procedural drift, right? And I have long said that if I had not been alive after germ theory, I would be very dead very fast because I would just be like, I don't see any germs.
Me too.
Everything's fine. Why would I need to wash my hands, right? So science is really the only reason that I'm alive currently. And I think a lot of people might be in the same boat as me, just as full disclosure.
Oh yeah, me too. I used to eat candy off the ground.
That's right.
Until
Jackie.
Until very recently, even like last spring, I think Diane and I were walking from our main building to our offices, and there was a candy on the ground, and I went to reach for it, and Diana was like, "Don't you even think about it." Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And the other girl that was with us was like, "What's going on?" And you're like, "She was going to pick up that candy off the ground and eat it."
You're like Elf.
Yeah. I'm like, candy?
See chewed gum on the sidewalk. Don't eat it. It's not candy.
But now I'm not doing that.
So if you're a behavior
Baby
analyst,
steps.
another thing that I think this article does very well is it gives a very nice list of some of these kind of key new routine points. What's drop off and pickup look like now? What do the hygiene look like now? What does mask wearing look like? Physical distancing look like? And then some recommendations. If you are working with a classroom or you are working with students, have you thought about how you're going to teach these skills? If you're not directly teaching them, are you going to use graduated guidance, or you're going to set up some picture activity schedules that families could practice with at home? Are you going to be using some desensitization planning, so either like systematic, or you're going to try exposure based desensitization plans? Are you going to use shaping? Are you going to use video modeling? So these are questions that you should be asking yourself if you haven't already answered them, and sort of get more consistent plans up and running. Because again, like you said, Donna, you can communicate those with families a lot sooner, meaning parents can practice, or you said this as well, Jackie, practice with families a lot earlier in the routine. If you're working in a school system, you've seen a lot of research on video modeling being very effective, which it is. Then, hey, maybe you could volunteer to make some of these models. Or maybe you already made some for a few of the students you work with that you could say, hey, you know what? Hand washing is the same no matter who you are in terms of the steps. You may need to break it down for some learners, but in the end, it looks kind of the same. So you might be able to use some of those models or repurpose some of the work you've already done. But if you don't recommend it, there's a chance that not everyone will think of it. Because guess what? There are a million things to be thought of. Not everyone is always thinking about the nitty-gritty of teaching skills. That's not everyone's job. We talked a little bit about some of the staff training recommendations in the article, staff training recommendations that we have. Again, if you haven't listened to our episode on hand washing, please do. It gives you some great ideas from the research on what has been effective for increasing hand washing in a variety of settings. And it's not as easy as just telling everyone you need to wash your hands or you're going to get COVID. That probably won't work as well as you'd like it to.
No, and it will work really well for like 1 minute.
Yeah.
Right?
Like
I'll be
right
like,
after.
I don't want to
outside
get
and wash your
COVID.
hands.
Yeah.
And then also things like, what is your organization doing in terms of data collection on some of these? They get to collect data on everything, but what are the key components that you're most interested in? What is going to be most important for safety in your environment? And is there data being collected on percentage of hand washing per classroom, or the speed of the pick up and drop off routine, or compliance with the new routine even.
Right.
And if so, who's monitoring that data? Who is making recommendations after that data? If you're a behavior analyst in a large organization, you might be the only person who's saying, hey, where's the data? Again, that's personal anecdote. I'm usually the person saying, hey, where's the data? Somebody needs to be looking at this data, which that means is usually me. And then again, what are our contingencies? It's not going to do well for us to get back to school and the first thing kids see after months and months away from school, having teachers yell at them about, no, you have to wash your hands. No, don't touch that. And I don't think any teacher will purposefully do that, but teachers are scared too. I mean, honestly,
Yes.
It's more likely that teachers will get sick than students. At least the overall research that currently exists points to that. So they're probably more scared than the kids are. And as much as we're scared for our own children or the children we work with, it's probably the adults who are more in danger of becoming, sick and then becoming potentially debilitated after contracting COVID.
But again, we don't know.
We don't know for sure, but that kind of seems to be the narrative that's coming out there. How accurate is that long term? I don't.
I think many students are probably anxious about going back to school, and I think teachers are doubly anxious, which could lead them to engage in this type of behavior that you're describing, Rob, especially as you're trying to get students into the classroom and into this new routine.
Right.
Kids are going to be excited. They haven't been there in a long time, and very
haven't seen their
quickly
friends.
they're
Right.
going to start. They're going to be over the line with what they're trying to do. Of course, right? Because you want to see your friends, and you want to hug your friends, and you want to high five your friends, and you want to sit next to your friends, right? And you want to show your friends all your new cool stuff. But none of that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the restrictions are at least here in Mass, they're drastic. What it's going to need to look like, right? So having teachers suddenly come in and be the heavy and need to yell at kids and say, you can't come in, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that, is not going to set the right tone for the classroom, but it's also without the students having any real prior training or understanding of what this is going to look like, it's going to likely fall to the teachers to try to police this.
Yeah.
It's not fair for them, but it's also going to create an overall aversive environment.
Yeah.
Which students may not want to come back to.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And some of it's going to be a matter of, okay, what are the reinforcement systems that you have in place? You know, this is a great time if you've been working in a number of classrooms and you've been working with a number of teachers like, I don't like reinforcement systems. This might be a great time to, help them rethink that idea. And I think if you're in a management or administrative position, this is a good time to think about, what am I going to prioritize as new behaviors? Do I want students to be safe? Yes. Do I want students to be happy? Yes. Okay, well, what are you going to do to make that happen? And how are you going to model that? And it may be a matter of modeling, hey, guess what? We don't need to work on our times table for the next 2 or 3 weeks. We need to make sure everyone can wash their hands. We need to make sure everyone understands when they can and cannot take their masks off. And then we can spend more of our time telling our kids, I know this is tough. Thank you so much for following the rules. You're making this such a safe environment. What a great job you're doing. Then, no, don't take your mask off. No, you're not supposed to take your mask off now. Because, the last thing we want is students saying, I'm scared to come back to school so much as I'm both scared to come back to school. And I really hate this aversive pile. I'm out of here. It's not going to be good if we're dealing with the double problem of safety and general hatred of the school that you are expected to go to.
And potentially the challenge of not having administrators that understand the priority versus jumping back into the times tables.
Yeah. As tough a time as this is probably the best time to make some of these significant changes. So if you're working in an environment where that hasn't been a priority, guess what? You might get more buy-in than you used to. People might be more interested. I know we're trying not to use buy-in, quite that way anymore. But you might have people more interested in, how are we going to avoid this problem, that are interested in hearing about, hey, praising students. DRA programs tend to work better than trying to put the kids on extinction or providing, the little shocks of yelling at the kids, stop doing that, put that down. You might have more people interested in hearing or learning about that. So again, if you're a behavior analyst, not just your ethical responsibility, it may be the easiest time you've ever had in having these conversations. People might actually want to hear them or come to you to ask about them. So
now is the time.
Now is the best time. I love the big limitation of this article in that all this information changes nonstop. So by the time this is published, all of these recommendations may be terrible. Who knows?
I like that, though. I mean, true.
Oh, yeah. Totally
Right?
fair.
Yeah.
Same for what we're saying.
So I hope you enjoyed hearing about the authors here, their list of suggestions. Again, I thought a really great summary of here's everything that everyone's probably been talking about for months and is a little different from state to state, but generally speaks to the reality of what coming back to school is going to look like and the amount of planning that needs to go into it. And again, as behavior analysts, who usually is thinking the most about how do we target behaviors, how do we set up reinforcement systems, how do we make things less aversive, how do we set up data systems. Again, we don't have a lock on this, but it is often what we're thinking about day in and day out. So this is really a good time to be sort of taking a little bit of a lead in these conversations as much as we can. All right, let's take a break. Then we'll come back and talk about our second article. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
And we are back talking about, well, coming back to school. But before we get into our second article, I want to make sure to give you listeners our first secret code word. Secret code word, why do I need that? That's because ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. By listening to the show, you are able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is listen to the show, then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com/get CEUs, and you're able to order learning credits for each of our shows. You're just going to need to enter in those 2 secret code words, like I said before. I'll give you the first one now. It's Donnie, Donnie. Donnie, like your favorite new kid. Remember them? Donnie. You can spell it with a Y too. We don't really care too much. But if you do it with an IE, we'll know that you were really listening closely to our anecdote, or maybe that you're an old like us and know probably who we're referring to. Donnie. All right. So now we're going to move into our next article. So this is Peleas and Novak, also from the 2020 BAP issue. And this article is all about dealing with kind of the anxiety around returning to school and then separation from parent or caregiver. And one of the things that I noted about this article was how much many of our old patterns of behavior are not going to really work. So certainly the idea of, when a parent drops off a child and the child is crying and sad, again, usually you see this with younger children. You might see it with older children too. And, you as the teacher, you as the professional say, it's okay, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. That was really true, this time last year.
I love that.
But now I don't know if I would have the nerve to say that to her. Don't worry, it's all going to be fine. I think we all want it to be fine. But frankly, as a parent, if a teacher told me, don't worry, it's all going to be fine, I'd say, oh, it's all going to be fine, is it? It's all going to be fine? My kid's not going to contract COVID in your school? You're using all your PPEs correctly? It's probably not the best way to go about allaying the fears of the families you work with. So I do think it was nice of this article, even though there's nothing in here that I think is again, like the previous article, nothing in here that's like, whoa, I never thought about that. I really do think it is good to review a lot of the patterns of responding that we would do in many of these situations where sort of that drop-off period, and acknowledging how many of the SDs that we're used to, or the statements we made that, provided some amount of like negative reinforcement for feeling like, oh, you said that, I feel better now, I'm not nervous, probably won't work the way you expected them to work. And if you're not thinking carefully about that, you're going to upset families. And it's one thing if families are saying, as a family, we're deciding not to send our child to school, we're going to do online learning. It's another thing to have a family say, I was going to send my kid to school, then I talked to you, and now I'm worse off than I was, because they're going to model that. Parents model a lot of anxious behavior to their children. Not that anxiety is the fault of parents, but it is typically a pattern that children have learned from parents, and anxious children usually have parents who at least have some level of anxiety. So if you are going to upset parents, you're going to upset the children even more. So we really do need to be careful about how we are responding to this separation anxiety. I also did appreciate how this article really described sort of just the systemic breakdown of so many systems that we were counting on in society. And I don't even think American society, in most societies in which school is something that is, a right of children, so many of our SDs were just yanked out from under us. So many of our environments suddenly were just filled with all these AOs that we never expected in terms of how we interact, what we're expecting in a given day. So what does it mean to wake up? What's the wake up routine look like? All of a sudden, so many of these interactions just gone out the window, and not, over time, or we were warned about this. It just happened one day. Hey, everybody, guess what? No more school. When's it coming back? I don't know. And we're coming back with not quite the same level of confusion as I think we all sort of started this with, but not necessarily with so much more information that makes this easy.
I think it's going to be a lot of BST, right? I think it's going to be a lot of practice. I think we're going to have to talk to our kids a lot. I think we're going to have to talk to our kids, maybe use some social stories in conjunction with reinforcement procedures and practicing, right? Because what each child's school day is going to look like is going to be vastly different. Right. And so I think not only is the school day going to be different, but how we approach school is going to be different. And one of the things that I've noticed when I'm talking to other parents and thinking about it and looking at Facebook, which you shouldn't do right now because, right, it's just a mess.
Yeah.
Is whatever,
you look at our Facebook. Don't look at any
right,
other Facebook.
Yeah. Whatever you decide to do is good for your family. I like that, right? So there should be no judging, right? But I think for parents, I think the best thing you can do for your kids is plan for what's going to happen, right? So let them know that they're going to have to wear masks. Practice wearing masks where it doesn't matter, right? First, practice wearing masks in the house. Practice wearing masks on a walk. Practice wearing masks when it does matter before you get to school where they're going to be required to wear masks all day potentially, right? Talk about what drop-off's going to look like. practice drop off, right? Not necessarily at the school, but practice like, here's what it's going to look like, and here's how we're going to feel, and here are the things that you can say to yourself to make you feel better, right? Let's do that together. Practice what drop back. What's it called? Pick up. Drop back.
I'm going to drop this kid back with you, parent.
What pickup is going to look at. It's going to be different. So what lunch is going to look like, right? You may have to modify what you're eating for lunch now if they don't have like a global lunch program, or you can't heat up your food now, or someone can't prepare it for you. Practice lunchtime routines at home. I think this was the main point of this article, really, was to make sure that as a parent are getting the information that you need from your school, and then setting up those situations where you can give your kid as much information and as much practice about those as possible, but then follow the plan. You yourself need to follow the plan, right? So when you drop your kid off at school, if they're crying hysterically, don't get into the hysteria with them. Like, you don't start crying too and be like, I know you're going to get COVID at school today, right? If you've decided to send your kid to school, send them to school, right? Say your statement of empathy, give them a hug, let them go.
Yeah.
Right? And be as consistent, as quick as possible, so that then, we all can get on with our day, and you're not accidentally reinforcing behaviors that you don't necessarily want to see every day.
And so much of that I think is so true in sort of that like research vacuum of looking at, where does separation anxiety come from? How do you treat separation anxiety? In the olden days, in the before times, it really was a matter of, differentially reinforce the response of the child. If the child is crying and fussing, you're not going to give, provide less attention, give the statement, I love you and I'll see you at school. And then you kind of like leave or move away, or, work with the teacher to set up some sort of a fun activity so that the child is able to, something fun. And then, wow, I love how you're playing that fun activity. I've got to go and I love you. Goodbye. Looking at trying to differentially reinforce your response as a parent. Again, I think if you are saying to yourself as a behavior analyst or as a practitioner or a teacher, you know what, I'll just follow that old golden rule of separation, you're missing a lot of nuance that exists more so now. It always existed, but it exists a lot more now than when some of that initial research was published back in 91. They cited, sort of talking about that. If you're just going to go into it saying, I'll just remind the parents that everything's going to be fine, and that if they draw attention to it, it's going to get worse, you're missing the point that so much has happened since the last time a child first came to school.
Yeah.
That family might have had deaths. They might have been sick themselves. The child might have been sick. That child hasn't been to school in some number of months
or seen anyone,
or seen anybody at this point. Their parent might have been struggling with, losing a job or trying to work with a job and do the online school. There are a lot of new routines and a lot of new reinforcers that are in play. And it really behooves you as a practitioner who's either going to be supporting teachers, is a teacher yourself in a program, to really up your communication, like you were saying, Jackie.
Up your empathy.
Up your empathy a lot.
Super, right? Yep. It's going to be like super empathy to the highest degree. It's going to be your superpower.
Yeah, and plan. And it might not be a matter of, really spending a lot of time on education. This article talks a lot about the idea of, the goodbye cues. So what are the goodbye cues? These are usually the things that parents, caregivers do before they leave. So they're getting their keys, they pick up a purse or a bag, they make statements about, okay, I'll see you at blank time. They start walking towards the door, the teacher comes over. These are all cues that are often going to precede tantrums, crying, whining. And while the same principles are going to apply, try to change some of those cues. Try to give the child something else that they can be doing. Once those cues start beginning, continue on with your chain of leaving behaviors. It's the same statement. It's the same move out. The teacher's going to say this. But again, just saying, hey, this is how we've done it before, we should do it again. That's true to an extent.
Right.
But if you just say that to a parent, you are totally missing all the experiences they may have been going through. And they may take that to be, you don't know what I'm going through. You don't understand the problem. I am scared about this. And you're telling me that my acting scared about my child maybe getting sick is going to make things worse. Doesn't necessarily change my behavior. Because, changing a behavior by telling someone what you're doing is bad, usually not the best way to affect behavior change. I don't know about you guys, but I found that out the hard way in my younger days when I thought telling people about science and how things are supposed to work was the be-all, end-all in terms of behavioral change treatment. And it is not.
Yeah, and one thing I really like about this article, if you want to do like a touch-up or like kind of a wraparound of this article, is they give you these like 9 steps that you can do as a teacher, right, to help you navigate these new landscapes.
It's old. Everything old is new again.
Right.
Actually, you know what? There you go. That's That's the theme.
Right.
Everything old is new again.
Yeah, but I mean, they're 9 steps, and I don't think we need to go over them really because you can read them.
You want to just generally do like a kind of brief. You don't have to
Right.
go through each one, but it's like the brief.
So it's basically like plan, tell people ahead of time what's going to be expected. If you need to do some pre-teaching, do it via telehealth model. You as a teacher need to be calm, have a plan on what you're going to do if somebody's freaking out, either it's parent or kid. Practice that, right? And then your environment needs to be very enriched and less stressful overall, and have a plan for parents to come and leave, right? And have all of the parents stick to that plan, and parents should not come back. Once they've left, they shouldn't come back as a surprise. Like just to check in. If a parent wants to check in, there should be a plan for them to check in, but they shouldn't be physically returning to that space, right? Because that's going to just intermittently reinforce all of the aberrant behavior you're going to see in the beginning.
Yeah.
Right. But I love those 9 steps. It's basically that, right? Plan, practice, don't freak out.
Yeah.
And be okay with someone else freaking out, but you can't freak out.
Yep.
Right. And I think a big part of it is recognizing that there is very likely going to be anxiety on both the part of the parent and the child. And you can be sensitive to that and responsive to that and empathetic, right? But there is going to be a plan.
Yes.
Right? And everyone's going to know what the plan is so that they can then follow that plan. And having a laid out plan can help to reduce that anxiety as well, because everyone's going to have a part to play in the bigger picture, right? And everyone's going to know what the safety measures are as best they can. And you're coming into this with the understanding that this family may have experienced something acutely traumatic, or just this general experience for all of us, once we look back on this, is going to be seen as relatively traumatic, right? So we're still in it, right? Like this is still part of this process. So as much as we can approach this situation with understanding and empathy, and nothing's going to be perfect right now, the better.
Yeah.
Right.
And when you're working with parents too, while in some form you do want to make sure that they're informed in understanding that they are able to be a huge part of sort of the change and the success of their child, be sure you are not overly putting that burden on them. Like, well, they're failing because you're failing, or they're going to fail if you don't succeed. You really want it to be more about empowering the parent. Like, I'm here to help you. You can do this. We're going to get through this. You have the power as the parent to make this change. You want the parents you work with to feel like they can do it. You don't want them to feel like, if I fail, my kid's going to fail and it's all on me and no one can help me, because that won't support what you're trying to do, which again is going to build meaningful rapport with folks that you may or may not have had that much communication with in the past few months as well. So you want to make sure to kind of rebuild those. And especially in schools, you might be a brand new teacher, so you have no relationship with these families.
Or have a new classroom.
Have a brand new classroom. Yeah, there are a lot of changes there. And again, a lot of these new routines are going to be pretty much EOs for anxious behavior. Like, what's going on? Like, this isn't the old system. I better act like what I do when something, scary happens. So again, communication is going to be important, like everyone's been saying. And if there's a sense that either the family is struggling or the child is struggling or both are struggling, make sure to acknowledge that as early as possible in the return to school planning, so that you can see, are there other professionals that I need help on with this? Again,
Definitely.
if you're like a behavior analyst in a school district, you may be the only behavior analyst in the school district. So you may or may not be able to help every family going through this, but there may be other psychologists who either are already on the ball with this or who you can sort of, work with to sort of talk about some of these suggestions. Again, they might not need your help on this, but, I don't know everyone you work with. I don't know what professionals are in your building, never hurts to double check.
Yeah, a collaborative team effort would likely be advised.
Very true. All right. So again, like you were saying, Jackie, I think those 9 steps are a great review of what do we do to have a child start in school again. And even if you say, I've done this a million times, I've been a teacher for years, I know the steps, I know what behaviors go on, I know the treatment for separation anxiety, not going to be a bad idea to review this, because so much of what you are used to and what you could expect in a given year is not the case this year. So it's better to be empathetic to that change. And with that, I think it's time to move into Dissemination Station. Oh, here we are. So I guess in reading these articles, these are both good summary articles in terms of there's very little in here that anyone who is sort of seasoned or has done a back to school session before is going to read and say, whoa, I never thought of that. But there is a lot in here that might make you pause and say, you know what? I don't think I was thinking of that as much as I should be, given the new normal that we're now in. So it's a really nice, thorough review on both ends, if not anything necessarily novel in terms of something new in the research that we never thought of before. And especially if you're a new practitioner, or hey, maybe it's your first year working in a school or at a new school, maybe you just graduated in the spring, you had one of those great virtual graduations. It's important to be thinking about how this process is going to relate to, the things you want to be as a practitioner. Number one, you want to have a lot of empathy for the people you're working with. Number two, you want to always be communicating both new routines, both parent-caregiver concerns, child concerns. You want to be able to communicate that because it's hard to come up with a treatment if you haven't heard what the problem is going to be. You could just make stuff up, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be effective.
That's not what we do.
No, not like make it up out of whole cloth, but hey, I know how to teach TAs. Chaining is a good way to do it. I know how to teach hand washing. Okay, is that going to be the main problem that you face? Is that going to be the most effective way to teach a number of students in a classroom with, special needs or even without special needs? Maybe not. Again, the more we can work with caregivers and parents to learn the new routines, the more we're going to be able to both prepare students so that they're less anxious and also figure out where are we going to need to do most of our troubleshooting? Where are the new routines going to need to be practiced? And if so, how are we going to support parents in practicing them so the first time they practice it isn't the first day of school when you have a million other things that you're also worried about and you don't want to give any parent or child or caregiver short shrift that first day. You never, what's the old Head and Shoulders commercial? You never get a second chance to make a first impression. If the first thing, parent is starting in a school, especially if they're like a child of a kindergartner, whether they're in a private school or a public school, and the first thing they see is someone looking angry and harried because, hey, you're scared too, and you got your big face mask on, and you're just yanking kids out of cars and be like, go here, you drive on, you can't come in. That's not good. That's not a great way to start the year off for anybody. This also, I think, is a good time too to be thinking about equity and thinking about the patterns that exist in your workplace or your school building. Have you been able to push for the use of more reinforcement systems? Now would be a great time to do so. Have you been able to talk about effective teaching methods that would be effective both for children with special needs and without special needs that could be taught to a large group of them rather than just these kids will figure it out eventually and then the children who need lots of repetition can go to their own classroom and that's where they'll learn. Like we talked a little bit about kind of in the middle of the show, the idea of what is the cohort going to be? Maybe this is a good time to rewrite some of those cohorts by helping teachers work on some of their own specialization or differentiation of skills. And as a behavior analyst, hey, you are really primed to be able to help out directly with that. And how are we going to support the staff we work with? Are we pushing the use of behavior skills training or similar training methods? Do we have a means of data collection on what's most important to our buildings for the safety of all? And do we have someone who can help monitor some of those changes and how effective they are in making everyone not just be safe, but I think also feel safe? Something that a lot of the groups I've been talking to in preparing to return to school have been, it's not necessarily, if the only system you have is how do people feel, that is probably going to be a lot more important now than it would be, say, any other September where you'd say, I don't really care how anyone feels. What are the test scores looking like? Who's coming to school? I think what's important now is people feeling safe. Now, that doesn't mean that as long as everyone feels safe, we're good, because you do actually still need to wash your hands and wear your masks. But
I think they're both important.
They're both important.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we should always care how people feel as well.
Yeah. No, I understand. No, I know, Dan. I know what you mean. But this would be a time, as if you haven't been thinking about that quite as much, or you've sort of been putting the social validity piece to the wayside because you're looking at more specific, direct, observable metrics, this might be a time to give yourself a break too and say, you know what? Social validity was always important. It's probably more important right now than it might have been a few months ago.
Yeah. I kind of love what you're saying because I feel like this...
Thank you.
It's usually just articles that she loves, but now she loves you.
Oh, wow.
Because what you're saying, Rob, is that this is an opportunity for everyone, whether you're an agency or a school, right, to come together and say, how can we make the best of this terrible situation that we're all in? And that may be behavior analysts looking at bigger picture validity metrics that we always probably should be attending to. And it may be an opportunity for, let's say, general education teachers to say, I need help here. And it could be the BCBA's chance to shine in that regard by either introducing new reinforcement systems for the classroom or maybe finally having the opportunity to share what's going to work best for this student by having them stay in the classroom and have the teacher fully participate in their behavior plan, right? So like this could be a nice bridging opportunity to really utilize everyone's strengths in a way that we haven't been in the past. Not that I really want to like silver lining this thing, right? But there has been a lot of interesting innovation that's needed to occur during this time period, and maybe that can happen in the school and educational settings as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think you just need to be really diligent, right? Like one thing I think we didn't talk about is that supervisors should really start thinking about the systems in which you are going to put in place to appropriately increase the behaviors that you want to see, such as mask wearing, sanitizing, right? Scrub wearing, like all of those things that, you know,
What
you're
if I
like,
don't want no scrubs?
you do. You definitely do. So all of those things that are going to be new skills for our teachers and therapists and BCBAs that are fairly vital, how are you going to reinforce and maintain those skills? And we have Supervision September coming up that you can listen to, and we'll talk a little bit about it. You know, that was just like a little, what's it called? Preview? Teaser. Yeah. Supervision September, and also our previous Supervision Septembers to kind of get a refresher on some different tactics that you can use to increase the desirable behaviors in your supervisors or supervisees and maintain those skills. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So whether you are an administrator, whether you are just in a more supervisory role, whether you are directly working with students and with families, there are a lot of steps that you can take to make the return to school, whatever it ends up looking like, as meaningful and effective and smooth as possible. For all of you out there, I do hope no matter what your fall is going to look like, we do hope that everyone continues to remain safe, continues to practice good behavior analytic procedure. And also, we hope you continue to listen to our show, and we hope that we continue to be a source of, entertaining and knowledgeable discussion for you all in these just interesting times. And with that, I think we're going to wrap up the show for today. I want to make sure to give everyone your second secret code word. It is Marky. M-A-R-K-Y. Marky. Like, you might call a permanent marker Marky for some reason because you anthropomorphize your items. Or you could be referring to Marky Mark from Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch. Marky.
Mackie.
Or as we hear in Massachusetts, Mackie.
Mackie. Mackie's going in the car.
Mackie Mac.
Say hi to your mother for me. All right. And that brings us to the end of another ABA Inside Track. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you have not, why not think about subscribing? No, don't even think about it. You should do it. You should totally subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. There are a lot of ways you can also reach out to us. Certainly, you can find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest as ABA Inside Track. You can find these episodes on YouTube with the YouTube subtitling feature. You can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find a summary of all of our episodes, as well as links to the articles that we have discussed. And for this episode, both of these articles are freely available on the Behavior Analysis in Practice page. Huzzah! And of course, there's always the old-fashioned email. You can email us at any time at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. Big thanks to all of you for listening. Big thanks to Jackie and Diana for being here. Also, thank you to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturroy for our interstitial music, Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for editing work, and Hollis Irvin from the Sycamore Workshop for his graphic design. We're adding this as an extra in August, so we might not even be another week before you get another full-length episode of the show. But however long it is, until then, keep responding. Bye!